Let me see. Let me try this. Oh, there it is.
Yes, you do. See?
Thank you. See, you sent me the because it wasn't
There you
there.
go. I got a couple tricks up my sleeve.
Thank you so much. You are a treasure.
Thank you, Anne.
She is a treasure.
Anne always tells me that. It's so nice.
And it's true.
And it's
I
true.
appreciate that. You want to make one more minute and then
I
start?
can wait one more minute. Could you make me a co-host?
How many of you have been to the mikveh?
We'll get to that.
Well, yeah,
We'll get to
we'll have some time for discussion after.
Okay.
that. Yeah.
It's a good question.
It is. Hold on one second. I'm trying to make you go. Here we go.
Just let everyone here just wait with us just a second. Okay, then we've got, that cannot be real. Lord. Jennifer, whenever you tell me.
Let's go.
Okay. So hello to everybody who's joining us live. This is very exciting. We know we have a number of folks who will be watching a recording of this. We've had a lot of requests for that. So for everyone who is going to be joining us after the fact on a recording, that's totally cool too. If any of questions that you have are not answered by anything that either Alisha and I talk about or anybody else asks about, definitely feel free to email after the fact. You can email me at sfort@bethYeshurun.org, and you can email Alisha at whatever she just says her email is right now. Alisha, what's your email?
AHKLAPHOLZ@gmail. It's Klapholz@gmail. Or you can find me on Facebook.
Yeah, also, but we're available at many venues. You
Or
can
if you
email
can't
me,
remember,
text
you
me.
can ask me and I'll send you to her.
That's-
Because everybody knows my email address.
That's true. So, of course, that's also true for all of you joining us live. You can definitely email us with any questions that is not addressed in our discussion, which is really exciting. And there we go. So first, just to introduce myself, because I know we have folks from all over joining us both live and watching this after. I'm Rabbi Sarah Fort. I am the assistant rabbi at Congregation Beth Yeshurun here in beautiful Houston, Texas. And I've been here since 2017. And this idea came about because Alisha, who will introduce herself shortly, and I have lots of discussions, and they often end up coming down to women, Judaism, halakha, Jewish law, and everything related. So mikveh and menstruation come up surprisingly often because this is what we talk about because we're really interesting people. Alisha, tell us about yourself for those who do not know you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Alisha Klapholz. I work at Congregation Emmanuel during the day, and sort of by night, I help run the mikveh that is here in Houston, the community mikveh that is housed at UOS. I teach people as they're getting ready to get married, both men and women, the traditional laws around menstruation and sex and mikveh and all of those things. And mikveh is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I'm especially interested in sort of talking about how we engage with mikveh as modern women and sort of the different approaches that conservative and Orthodox people have.
Thank you for that. And we have, as always, by always I mean the last time and this time, to moderate Jennifer Rosenzweig, who likes to listen in on our conversations and ask really good questions. We figured, why not give her the opportunity to shine and do it again? Because this is something it's not controversial. It's not because anything I think that talks about women and menstruation and sex and religion, when you knot all of those together, it becomes something of a bit of a touchy subject. So why not talk about it openly and in public and have Jennifer Rosenzweig ask you questions? So thank you, Jennifer, Program Director at Beth Yeshurun, for asking us good questions. Take it away.
You are so welcome. And Alisha teed up the first question perfectly, which is how do non-Orthodox and Orthodox diverge in their approaches to mikvah and menstruation.
Oh, also just real quick, if you have questions, definitely feel
Okay,
free to
in the chat.
save those, type them into the chat so you don't forget what they are. And you can also ask them at the end. We'll work through the questions that are in the chat. And once we go, if we have time, we go through those. Then you can also just ask questions. Yes, as you said. Non-Orthodox and Orthodox diverge in their approach to mikvah and menstruation. So, Alisha, you have thoughts?
I have some thoughts. I mean, the main thing is that it comes down to, I think the Orthodox approach is that everything comes under halacha, Jewish law, and that we are obligated in the halacha. I mean, and so sort of the standing on one foot of it is that, I don't know, it's a little complicated. It's basically, you know, you have biblical nida and you have rabbinic nida, and nida is the menstruation or sort of ritual impurity period. Would you think? I don't know. It's hard to translate it into English. Basically, when you see nida is there's I'm gonna forget exactly where it is, but it speaks about when a woman is menstruating for 7 days, she is benidata, like in her time of nida, and at the end of that, she gets up and she kind of just goes and she's done. Maybe she washes off.
It's in reference to the fact that you can't have sex with a nida. Like that's like we see. Yeah, that's what Torah says. You can't have sex with a nida, and you're like, okay, well.
But that's in a separate.
It's not the same. It comes up later, but a lot of the rules we can get into.
Yes.
This, but a lot of the rules end up being the rabbis see that and they go, oh, it's about sex, and you're like, what?
Yes. But it says basically she's you know, tuma, that she is ritually impure in that time. And then what you have is the sort of rabbinic take on that, which also you have nida, you have zava, which is your time when you are bleeding at a time that's not your menstruation, and that's 7 days. And then sort of these two became conflated. I have notes here. I'm trying to look ahead and this isn't coming out well. I apologize.
It's not your fault because like the Torah says there's two categories. There's like if you have run-of-the-mill genital discharge, male or female, and then there's irregular genital discharge, male or female. And like it makes sense in the Torah, and then like, but that's not, we don't operate off that basis. Like none of us
No.
hold by any kind of rabbinic law, any Jewish, the way Judaism, any kind of Judaism right now understands mikvah is that they don't really follow Torah as it's laid out at all. They've knotted things together because reasons.
Yeah, and so what you have is, because there's a piece that comes up in the Gemara that, you know, at least for the Orthodox approach, that said that when the women of Sderot, when they saw any amount of discharge, any blood, even the size of a mustard seed, that they would count out 7 days, meaning that it could have been their regular menstruation, or it could have been an zava, like bleeding at a time or discharge at a time that was not their menstruation. And the thing is that, so for nida, when you get up, there's no mikveh. For zava, illness, there is mikveh, and you also count out 7 days. So you have this sort of conflation there,
Exactly.
The sort of mixing of these two.
Right. And it's so fascinating to me, you know, like the Torah says, okay, if you're a man, a regular discharge, seminal emission, you wait basically overnight, you're good. Okay. And if you're a woman, you start your period 7 days later, you're good. Okay, that's regular. And then there's like irregular. And that's the rabbis are like, okay, well, if there's something outside of the scope of a normal, either, you know, like genital emission of any sort, something irregular, then you have to wait until you're done with it. Then you wait 7 days, and then you dunk in Maim Haim, some kind of living water, a river or a stream, or I guess theoretically the ocean, though I mean our ancient peoples didn't really live near so many oceans. And there was these two categories, and it made sense in that way. And then what the real, like, you know, how did it affect your life? You couldn't offer sacrifices in the temple because of this, you know, you were just in the status of not able to offer sacrifices. And when you're not, you are able to offer sacrifices. And you can't have sex with a woman who's on her period. That's all Torah true. The rabbis, so a good chunk of time later, they just decided, like, all the stuff about men, we're just going to chuck it, which I just found, like, and they literally say this too, which just cracks me up. Like, it's literally in there.
It is, but also like and this is like the Orthodox argument.
This is why
that
I like
it's
talking
in that,
about it.
huh?
That's why I like talking about it with you.
The sort of Orthodox approach in this is that having sex with a woman who is in her nidah is listed among the arayot, which are very, very strongly held.
Sure.
And the arayot are the forbidden relationships, like don't have sex with like various relatives, like various close relatives, like animals, like all of these things in there. And included in there is don't have sex with a woman who is in nidah. And that's why, like, at least from the Orthodox perspective, why they sort of hold on to this so strongly.
But I mean, it's not even just like it is Orthodox. It's the classical kind of halachic way of looking at it, but I don't think it doesn't bear mentioning the fact that, Ezra, so we're talking like a long time ago, is saying like, oh, well, okay, we're gonna, the temple's gone, right? Temple falls, and then we're having rabbinic Judaism fomenting, later rabbinic Judaism, and they don't have to worry about, there's a temple anymore, so you don't have to worry about someone is, ritually impure, they've touched someone they shouldn't touch, they can't go into the temple and offer sacrifice, there's no sacrifice anymore. But they get rid of the rules for men. They really do. Of either there's something irregular coming out of you, or just the regular, seminal emission just happened, teenage boy, wake up, whatever. So I've been told that, they just get rid of it. And like, for no other reason than they just didn't want to do it anymore. Like the Rambam, so it's not me, like Sarah, this crazy Los Angeles trained woman rabbi, saying, like, the Rambam says, oh yeah, they got rid of the requirements for men because honestly, no one was going to do them. So they're like, yeah, because no one wants to do them anymore. The men aren't going to follow it. But the stringencies for women, that's when you see the conflation in rabbinic Judaism, and then carried up through all of our other, all the other guys, making it more stringent. We're saying, instead of saying, oh, woman who, as long as you finish your period, then you're good to go. They combine that with the category of an irregular emission, which is you have to wait a certain period of time, and you have to dunk in Mayim Chaim, which we take it now to be a mikveh. Most of us don't live by bodies of natural water.
Yeah.
They combine the two. Regular, genital emission, irregular genital emission, only for women. Combine them, making a regular, natural, normal bodily function into combining it with this category. And for men, get rid of everything.
I mean, and I think that this is part of also, I teach a lot of women who also have a lot of difficulty, I think, and don't just accept sort of like what the sort of long held traditions within Orthodoxy are. I think it is also worth mentioning that when you say that you're Orthodox, like for women, the things that are expected is that you will, light candles, keep Shabbat, and go to mikveh. Those are sort of the expected categories when you're Orthodox.
Is it fire, water, bread? Is that what it is?
Yes, it's a terrible book. Terrible book.
It's a book recovering the three women's mitzvot for those who are unfamiliar, either who are not Orthodox or didn't work in a Jewish bookstore and, dawdle along the Baal Tshuva path, like others of us did. There's a famous book, Fire, Water, Bread, which is the third, quote unquote, if you're not watching me, three women's mitzvot, as if you don't have any other mitzvot to do. There's nothing else Jewishly a woman needs that's important except for Shabbat candles and baking challah.
Those are the ones you die in childbirth. Those are the ones you die in childbirth if you neglect them.
Yeah. Yes. Well, those obviously are the most important.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of the women that I teach have a lot of difficulty with this. And so I sort of talk with them through it a little bit. And, I don't know that they ever really come to accept certain parts of it. A lot of this is really difficult. A lot of it is negative. And still at the end of the day, I don't know, it's one of my favorite things. And I love mikveh. And my goal is to always make people, help people find a way to love mikveh, whatever that looks like for them. But, one of the bigger, one of the sort of bigger, broader arguments that I see happening in the modern Orthodox community is sort of women saying, you know, these rabbinic laws, like what they're talking about is when you're taking zava, this illness, and saying that it's the same as nida and sort of putting the two together, you're saying women don't understand their bodies. They don't understand what's going on. They don't understand this natural process.
They literally say it. They literally say it in the text. They literally say, like, women don't know. It's literally in there. They say, oh, our women don't understand when their period is. It's like,
but I mean, maybe in that time they totally didn't, because you're talking about a time when, like, women had, you know, different nutrition. They may not have menstruated regularly. Like, we live in the modern era. Women have, we have better nutrition. Women have pretty regular periods. Like, we know when our bodies are going to be doing this, at least to a certain degree. Like,
no, it's true. Like the Rambam talks about, he's like, you know, women menstruate their whole lives, and you're like, really, Maimonides? You're a doctor. Women don't menstruate their whole lives.
Olden days.
Exactly.
It is no longer with Sarah after the manner of women.
For a lot more.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
So,
if a woman didn't live past 50 or so, you conceivably would menstruate until the day you died, because women weren't living to be 75, 80 years old. You know, like, so like, to speak to Alisha's point, because I think that's a really good point, is like, you know, maybe it's true that women at some point along the long scope of history didn't know when their periods were. But now, not all women, first of all, not all people who menstruate know when they're menstruating, beginning or ending. But a lot of women know approximately when their cycles are, for sure.
And I mean, like, one of the things that I'm seeing, you know, whether it's the people that I'm talking with, like, or, you know, the people that I'm actually teaching, there are people who are sort of reverting back to sort of, I guess, I don't know what to call it, but biblical nida, like just the 7 days, and taking off the Sheva Nikim, the white days, and they're sort of removing this conflation, and they're sort of looking to the conservative movement. And actually, whenever I teach people who sort of are like, I don't know that I want to do this, I say, look, I was trained by an Orthodox organization. I'm going to give you what the Orthodox organization says. If you're going to do this, you have to treat it as a halachic decision, because I'm teaching women who, for the most part, are self-identifying Orthodox. And so I say, here are the tshuvot, the papers that you know, that the conservative rabbis have put out, and the different opinions on how to approach this. And, you know, I just sort of, I send them on their way. But,
no,
you know.
You're saying, like, look, I'm not going to, like, paskin halacha. I'm not going to tell you Jewish legally how you should live your life. But I'm telling you what these are valid opinions that are out there that are possible for you to do. And that's, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways. Like, the conservative movement has, like, 3 tshuvot, 3 kind of official legal rulings of the movement. And 2 of the 3 of them, they really, because of the whole conflation of zava and irregular discharge, something medically is going on, there's something happening, versus, you know, nida, you're on your period, it happens. And the same, we need to, like, unknot those 2. And when you do that, you have this, like, in that 7-day period where the 7 days when you're, you know, you're not bleeding, but you're also considered as if you are bleeding. We're like,
yeah,
as a movement, one of the tshuvot doesn't do it, which I remember back and read them again, because I was like, I need to know what I'm talking about, and I forgot that one of them did not do it. But
it was Rabbi Berkowitz who read that, right?
It's Rabbi Berkowitz, yeah,
which is crazy, because
I know.
she
literally wrote the book on basically, like, modern mikveh.
Taking the Plunge. If any of you are interested, that's her book. It's on my list when I teach people.
It's a good one. I recently bought it for somebody, and she's really great, and she's really, I mean, I don't disagree with her on everything she thinks, but on that point, I definitely do not hold by her. But she, like, one of the 3 says you got to keep those 7 days after that you're not on your period. But that's one of the main things that the movement did, is say, like, okay, these 7 days, these niki'im, these clean days, or the white days, or whatever you want to call them, like, they're not, if you want to, but Kef, good on you, like, you're allowed, but there's no need to do that. The conservative movement officially says you don't need to do that. And that's probably one of the biggest things we do. And also the kind of divisions between, like, what can you touch your husband? Because it assumes everybody is straight and married. Though conservative tshuva says, one of them, like, even if you're not married, even if you're just in a relationship where you're having sex, you still gotta go. Though I've heard from friends who do, like, want to go to mikveh, that they sometimes, and they don't wear a wedding ring because they're not married, that's, like, a little bit difficult. Like,
I know someone who had a ring so that she could go.
I mean, I kind of, I don't know. I like I throw it up when I go. Not here so much, but like when I lived in Israel, for sure.
I mean, because at the end of the day, it's often, the Orthodox institutions that are the gatekeepers to the mikveh.
Well, I mean, Israel, you have the added level of the mikvaot are essentially government funded, so they're government run. And
Government funded and Orthodox.
Yes, and because the government only recognizes Orthodox, and even then only certain kinds of Orthodox. And so I wouldn't like walk in there in like my sweatpants and be like, "Hey guys, I'm here to use the mikveh," because I didn't want to imagine what that conversation would be like. So long skirt, cover gun. I know how to do it. I've lived that. I know how to do it. But I definitely have gone incognito. Is it for me? Because you don't want to have that conversation. It's just scary.
No, I mean, yeah.
Are you all ready for the next question?
Yes.
Super. All right. So we've touched on this a little bit. There's a lot of emotional baggage around the mikveh and some of the terms that we use around it, and even the idea of having to go to the mikveh itself. So can you unpack some of that for us?
Oh, language. Alisha kind of touched on this earlier.
Yeah. So the one that I really want to talk about is the one that I hate the most.
I know what it is.
Tahara mishpacha. Yeah. So tahara is like tahor. Like it's often defined as purity or clean. I really want to say it's in the book that Janice Rubin and Leah Lax did about mikveh, talking about like, gosh, now the words are escaping me, but sort of like spiritual vulnerability.
Ooh.
Yeah, that like when you're tuma, it's tuma and tahara, and tuma is the sort of like unclean, and tahara is the like cleanness, but spiritual vulnerability, because you're not able to bring this sacrifice to the temple. Not that we have a temple right now.
But if we did.
And mishpacha, like family. So like this ritual purity of the family. But like, what does that mean? Because the whole idea behind so much of these sort of rules around nida and mikveh and when you can go is so that women will go when they're at what should be their most fertile time.
Right. If you do the math out, you're going to be at your most fertile, and you're going to go home, and you're going to you haven't had sex in a while.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's sort of the idea behind it. But really, like, what's a family? A family could be like any unit. Like, is two people not a family? Two people can be a family. And I get really upset because like maybe two people are a family because they don't want children, or maybe they can't have children. And like, it just, no, I don't use that term.
I've never loved the term, the tahora, the tahor. I mean, it's not the way that we kind of learned about it in school. This like tahara mishpacha, family purity, or tuma. Tuma is like uncleanliness, or I mean purity. Like the rabbis, again, this is just how I was taught, but I think there's a good amount of validity to it, is that our rabbis were really obsessed with status, not as like driving a Beamer status, but like really knowing kind of what and who everybody was. Like, are you a Jew or are you a not Jew? Are you a Kohen? Are you a Levite? Are you an Israelite? Are you like just knowing kind of what everybody was? And so like, are you able to offer sacrifices in the temple? Are you not able to offer sacrifices in the temple? There's not a good or a bad, because those things can switch places constantly. So like I'm gonna like not inception myself and get this conversation too deep in this, but I think it's important to know. But we can say like, look, it's just a status. And the conservative movement Tshuva, the one I really love, which is Rabbi Susan Grossman, which is really brilliant, and I highly recommend it to everybody to read. It's so informative. She says that we need to not use those terms at all. She says, don't use the term tuma, don't use the term tahara mishpacha, because they are so negatively weighted. Because what woman, I don't feel unclean or impure on my period, and there's nothing impure about a period, or unclean or bad about a period.
Natural process.
Yeah, like if there were no periods, there'd be no babies. Like, how is that a bad thing? So like, we're human beings are implanting, like overlaying, the male human beings are overlaying that kind of discomfort. And if you look at kind of all the, blood, just everything ancient and medieval among both in Christian Europe and in kind of Muslim Spain and previously in the concurrent religions at the time of the ancients, there was so much hang up over women and blood and female sexuality is obviously related to, I think, to all of this, and just this huge male discomfort with all of it. And so to kind of say, oh, it's impure, it's bad. That's you, my dude. That's not, because half of us engage with that on a more or less monthly basis or have at some point in our lives. And I'm pretty sure it doesn't make me impure or unclean or bad. Just saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also like a little bit of, sort of there's that, and then there's the idea of like tuma, like what you're talking about with dirt. And like, for me, the bigger problem comes in when people just sort of assume that you can't touch a Torah. But like,
oh my God.
Torahs are not makabel tuma. Like
explain
taking this back a step, like the Gemara has, which is where all of the rabbinic laws like come from. They speak about sort of how tuma can be transferred from one person to an object to object.
The men in the Gemara, the men who wrote this stuff, it bears saying.
It does, but like the Gemara is a document that was written by men about men, ostensibly for an audience of men.
Yes,
but
100% agree.
view it as a modern document today, and it applies to women today because the laws that we have were taken from that.
I 100% agree. 100%.
But it's totally from like a cis hetero male view. Absolutely.
So they're gonna have that like an icky periods kind of thing. I mean, why do you think the Gemara literally says like a Torah scholar can't greet a nida. You can't walk behind a nida because the dust she kicks up is unclean.
But again, that's because of this idea of like, yes, it's the ick factor, but it's also the chain of tuma. And, like that's not on our radar today as modern people, but like in that era, like people wanted to be ready to go take a sacrifice to the temple whenever they wanted to.
And so it might happen. You never know.
They wanted to be in like a constant state of readiness to, like go and make that sacrifice. But like for me, like it comes out like in the modern era, we're like, oh, you can't touch Torah, because women can't do that. Like, no.
What's so funny to me is that like the Ramah was Rabbi Moshe Isserles, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which is more or less modern in terms of Jewish law, literally says, well, it's not Jewish law, but a woman shouldn't touch a Torah, shouldn't touch a Siddur, shouldn't lead prayer. And you're just like, wow, at least he said it wasn't really Jewish law. At least he copped to it. Kind of appreciate that. But yeah, you have this idea of women. When I teach, kids about, I did talk to the 6th graders at shul about tefillin, and they make like wooden tefillin, so they understand like the process. And they'll scream, and inevitably someone in every class says, and I don't blame them because they've heard this somewhere, like, oh, but I heard girls can't wear tefillin, or girls can't touch tefillin. And you're like, ugh, because it's like related to this idea of, oh, but you're gonna impart your impurity to this piece of Torah. I mean, it has the same kind of level, Torah, tefillin, parchment, as Torah, or like a girl can't touch. I remember being taught when I was really, really young. I know my mom's like on here right now. So, but I remember her telling me, not like I couldn't touch the Torah. She would never tell me that. I had a bat mitzvah and it was great. Everyone loved it. But I remember her telling me that she remembers being taught, oh, girls can't touch Torah because when I was in my rowdier days, I was like, oh, because you have like nida fingers and you're going to touch it and you're like, ooh. Because it's idea like, oh, you're going to like mess up the Torah. Like, you'll make the Torah impure. And that definitely comes from the rabbis and a lot of the men after them. And that's, I think, a lot of us as modern, but I mean, of course, in the conservative movement and also, modern feminist Orthodox folk, to say, let's dig down into that, because that does not actually seem to derive from anything in our law or our understanding of any of either how menstruation works or our understanding of how Torah works. Because the Torah, like, come on, the Torah is Torah. It's divine law and thought on paper. And you think that like period blood's going to mess something up? Come on. It's not that strong.
I mean, it's going to be nowhere near it.
Also true, but like, come on. To me, it just shows like the discomfort of people in general, not just men, but people in general, society in general, not wanting to talk about women, menstruation, and I think an underlying issue is women's sexuality, because you can't really divorce those two.
Well, yeah, and like part of that is kind of, you know, to acknowledge some of these internal goings on with women is to acknowledge, you know, not just menstruation, but like sex, ability to have sex, like all of these things.
Right. I remember reading in my firm-year days about a woman who was saying how she went through menopause, she wasn't getting periods anymore, and it's not that she missed going to mikveh per se, but she missed the delineation in her life.
Yeah.
Of that, because now, you know, she's like, I'm available to my husband anytime. That was her term, her words, and that was.
Though, yes, and that's coming from some of the language and some of the terms where it's like mikveh is used, you know, mikveh for us is, you know, it's a place where we mark transitions, you know, being not Jewish to being Jewish, you know, from being a nida, from menstruating, to, you know, being tahara, being, you know, and it's about being available. Some of the sources that I teach around, you know, around Judaism and sex and rabbinic writings on this do speak about being available. And, you know, this is what you were talking about in that book that kind of goes back to what I was speaking about, that for Orthodoxy, women are expected, you know, to light candles, you know, keep Shabbat and go to mikveh. And it's sort of like you snatch that away. And this has defined so much of their married life. You know,
so it's more than just sex. It's more than sex. It's like this huge defining like aspect of your married life and your Jewish selfhood, really. So it sounds like.
Even for me, like I love mikveh, but it's hard to find a woman who doesn't have some sort of conflicted feelings with it.
That's fair.
You know,
so what do you love about it, Alisha? Can you describe what you love about it?
I mean,
because you
for
escape
me,
your children in the evening?
No, it's because I am a feminist at my heart, and I believe that mikveh is, you know, while I say mikveh is a space for everyone, really, like I think that it's a women's space. I think that for too long it has been a space for women, run by women on the middle, but sort of like still under the rule of male rabbis. And for me, like it's about reclaiming mikveh as a space for women, that we should have more of a say in what goes on and defining it. And I think that mikveh is really like our holiest space as Jews. Water was one of the first things that was created in the earth. And when you have, like, you know, in the story of creation, water was one of the first things that was created. And when you have a mikveh, you're channeling water in as natural a way as possible, or an actual like natural water way. And there you are, and it's just you and God, and there's no chatzitza, no separation between you and the water, and it's to return you to as natural a state as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm coming across like very antagonistic to mikveh, but I think the reason that you and I love talking about this so much is because we're both very pro going to mikveh for all sorts of things, not just to, you know, going from not being able to have sex, being able to have sex, but for lots and lots of reasons. I think we just kind of approach that as slightly differently, but we end up in very much the same place with very much the same motivation, which is that mikveh is, if we're going to say this is something that's predominantly by cisgender women in women's bodies, and if you're someone who menstruates, it's a space for you, and to like, let's take it back, like let's shear away all the stuff that got added on and added on and added on, and look at it for what it is, which, like you said, is a space to mark transitions from non-Jews to Jews when they're converting people, you know, before you're allowed to have sex and then after you're allowed to have sex. And you can use it for so many more things than that. Like let's take it back. Let's make it ours, and not let something that's so great an experience be kind of left back in the dark ages.
I mean, it's also that, like, I mean, for me, like, I exist mostly in non-egalitarian spaces. For me, that's not a negative thing, but I am used to having, you know, women having a sort of somewhat separate space, but Jewish ritual does not offer as much, I think, for women. And for a lot of our life experiences, there just aren't rituals for it. Like, how do you mark a miscarriage? like Jewish ritual doesn't really offer something
No,
for
it
that.
has nothing.
Like when you want a ritual so that you can have like an easy labor, like maybe you had a really hard pregnancy, Judaism doesn't really offer you a ritual for that, but you can have that in the space of mikveh. You know, and even in egalitarian spaces, I think that women's voices are often not as heard as men's. And again, like I think that it offers this space to mark these transitions that are uniquely women's, and that Judaism hasn't really given us an answer for yet. And mikveh can be that space.
For sure. I've seen people craft rituals regarding, you know, using mikveh to mark, you know, like when your divorce is finalized or finishing chemo. I know people have gone, you know, after a miscarriage. I know people have gone entering menopause. So just again, it's marking transitions. It's like I was in this phase and now I'm in this phase. I'm not going from something from bad to good or good to bad. Life is full of changes and phases, and they bleed over into each other. And thank you, Jennifer.
I have a lot of the Mayim Chaim, which is a pluralist mikveh that I talk about a lot in Boston. And I have access to pretty much all their ceremonies that they've written. And, you know, I've taken people here in Houston. When I say people, I mean women.
Yes, you do not take men.
You know, I've taken a lot of people and I use some of their resources. I have other resources that, you know, they also wrote a really interesting one for people marking transition of when they're transitioning gender.
Yeah, for sure. I've had friends do that.
Yeah, there's a ceremony that, you know, for that. But I feel like mikveh is my space.
I mean, I think it's also important to say, like, I definitely see the worth of having that space in non-egalitarian spaces, because you're saying like there are so many spaces that are really male dominated, lots and lots of them, and to say like there's not just a private space that's female dominated, because I feel like so much of non-egalitarian Jewish space, public is male and private is, you know, female. The woman is in the home, the woman takes care of the children, but this is saying like this is a place that's it's kind of communal. I've been to mikvahs where like you're there with a lot of ladies and you're there with at least one other person, you know, and it's also, you could be by yourself and be with yourself, and I would argue with God, and that's really important. But also, you know, in egalitarian spaces, I think it's also important to have kind of, and this is more interesting when you have kind of people who are off the gender binary, but to have single gender spaces within that, like we can say, I mean, I'm happily egalitarian and I operate entirely in egalitarian spaces, but I think it's really important to be around, I love just being around women, and I think it's important for guys to be around guys, and also to have spaces where we are together and we are equal and we are contributing in that way. But I think just because you live in an egalitarian world, an egalitarian space, doesn't mean there's no value to having a single gender space.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like another piece of mikveh that's really interesting is making sure that it is a space for everyone and making sure that everybody feels comfortable wherever they're coming from going there. And I especially feel this as a responsibility, like in helping to run the mikveh that's here housed at UOS, because we have people who are coming in, whether they're from the UOS community or Beth Yeshurun or anywhere else. Like, I don't ask where people are coming from. If I don't know the names, like I just try to make sure that they're not like a super rando who's going to make our attendance feel unsafe. But other than that, like we're happy to have people come in and do whatever. But I love the sort of conversations that happen, I think, in the broader mikveh, in the broader mikveh world around things like chatzitza, which is the separation between a person and the water. And, you know, like in the past, it was just like, oh, take off your nail polish, like take off any earrings or whatever. But like in the modern world, like we have things like piercings and like hair pieces, and like how do you deal with that? Because like, you know, and I love sort of delving into some of the halachic answers on this from the Orthodox perspective, because for some of them it's like, well, maybe you don't actually have to take that thing out, you know, because it might close up, or like one of the things,
the number one question I get when I bring people who are converting to mikveh is like, I have a piercing, and if I take it out for any more than like a short period of time, it's going to close up. and I tell them leave it in.
Do you have them like wiggle it around or?
I trust that they know how their piercings work.
Okay. Because I feel like the answers that I've seen on the Orthodox perspective is sort of like, if it's something that you can take out, you should take it out. If it is something that will close up, if you take it out, you should wiggle it around so that the water will go through there. And again, this is like one of the differences between like Orthodox and conservative, where like you don't just trust the person, but like that's the thing, is that many mikvahs are housed in an Orthodox space, and the Orthodox, it's sort of, you have people who are Orthodox who are the gatekeepers, and my goal is always to make sure that people feel comfortable going, because I want people to have a positive experience and I want them to come back. And I know that we've talked so much about the negative stuff here, but like I have a really positive experience. Like I love it to be spa-like. Obviously not like during coronavirus, but like normally, like I set out candles when people are coming. Sometimes I'll play music, or like I'll have scents there.
I should go to the mikveh with you. Have a whole experience. I've been some really grody mikvahs, man.
I'm sure.
They're not.
So that's
really, nice ones. Sorry,
a good question. I think we've talked about lots of different things, but there's, I mean, the only mikvah I've ever seen is UOS, and there's lots of them out there. Tell us about some of the other ones that you've seen.
Not horror stories. I take you mean not horror stories.
Why not? Throw one of those in there too. Let's run the gamut.
I've been more to like really great ones, or at least like perfectly clean and hygienic ones, and some really odd ones. Then I have to like gross mikvahs. I've been on, I can count on like one hand. Really not. It's very uncommon in my experience.
I'm like super spoiled. I've only been to 4 mikvahs in my life, and they're like, the oldest one is actually the one that's housed at UOS. The first mikvah I ever went to was when I was living in Shanghai, and they finally opened a mikvah there. And it's this gorgeous, gorgeous, like giant pool that you like step down into, of course, but it's giant and beautiful because, you know, they're building it so that people they had been jumping off the dock, like around Suzhou, like an hour away from Shanghai, like wearing t-shirts. So it was gorgeous, and they got it just before Passover, and I was helping them put the dishes in. And of course I was like newly religious, and I was like, what are we doing?
You're like, you're putting dishes in water?
And like, it was me and like this chassid who was living there, and we're just like dunking like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dishes because we just had to get them done. And then there was, when I was living in DC, both times I was like, there was the one that was out in Silver Spring where there were like 20 prep rooms, and you would never see anybody except like if you happened to get there on a busy night, like you didn't have to make an appointment. You would just show up, and you would hope that you didn't see your neighbor in the lobby, because that could be awkward. But that was it. And then in DC, they opened the mikveh when I was living there. And then UOS, like this is the oldest one. And I just try to,
I don't know the oldest one.
I'm very spoiled.
You are very spoiled. Oh man. I went to like the grossest one I've ever been to is probably, I went to one in Paris. It was literally, it was like mud on the floor. And I mean, just, it was gross.
Okay, but like we're trying to talk like positive experience.
No, the one, I mean, that's the thing, like spa, hands down, best mikveh I've ever been to, Cyprus. The Chabad has, it's beautiful. It is gorgeous. First of all, I love not having to bring anything with me. We were living in Israel. We were on vacation there, and I didn't want to bring like a whole bunch of stuff with me. I never really want to bring a whole bunch of stuff with me. And they had everything you could want. It was beautiful. It was clean. It was big, and it was like one room. It was like you know, just for one person to go and do their thing and leave. It was beautiful. And the smallest mikveh, I can say this, that you know, there's a halachic minimum of how much water you can have in there, and that to make it like check out, and that would be the one in Tokyo. It was literally like the lady.
That's the most Japanese thing ever, to have like a small mikveh.
It was just big enough. Like the lady asked me, and she was like, do you do this like Lubavitch? And I didn't know what that meant. So I said, no.
You lay it flat like a fish. And
apparently there's like you have to like kind of, I don't know. She's like, do you leap off of the step? And I was like, what? No, I just kind of, plunk down there, and I just kind of do my thing.
So Lubavitch is like everybody like. Another thing that I like love about mikveh is that everybody has their own style of how they dunk and like, you know, like how you stand. It's like some people face the wall, some people face the side, some people face the attendant. I'm always looking down at my shoes. But Lubavitch, like they, as the attendant, when they face the attendant, I'm always looking at my shoes until they're under. But Lubavitch, they lay out like they're in a pool.
I mean, I think it's cool.
That's what I was told.
I get it.
Maybe I was wrong.
No, I mean, as close as I could. The lady, it was a Chabad mikveh, and she was Chabad, but she wasn't Lubavitch. So it's a thing. It's a thing. They're not all Lubavitchers. And it was just a fascinating mikveh. So yeah, in terms of like actual mikvehs, there was no room. You had like just kind of get in there and just kind of plunk yourself down.
For it.
I was also very tall for that mikveh. That happens not infrequently. And also the cool thing, so like in LA, we lived in Pico Robertson, very Jewish area. And the mikveh, that's how I'm spoiled. It wasn't that it was always clean. It wasn't like the fanciest, but they had, again, like 20, maybe 24 rooms, and you would, and 2 mikveh, and you would like the series of connecting doors, and you would never see anyone. I mean, there'd be like waiting room with a ton of ladies, and it's so cool also because there was definitely like, there were frum ladies, there were like Persian ladies in jeans, and just because that's like the last thing to go is like mikveh, especially with the Persian. And I was just so spoiled by that because you never had to make an appointment. You just go there, they look like the ticket like you do for a deli counter.
That's what I was talking about in the like show and tell. I was trying to explain like in the tour, and I was like, when you live in a community that's bigger, not only do you not have to make an appointment, but like they'll have like this like concealed chain like hallways and stuff where you don't see anybody else.
It's like a maze. You'll never see, I mean, in the waiting room you would, but you would never see anyone otherwise. And it's just like, it's so well run. But the cool mikveh in LA that I had been to maybe once or twice was the one housed at American Jewish University where our rabbinic school was, because it's a community mikveh. And they, like there's not a lot of rain in Los Angeles and it has to be natural water. So what are you going to do? They bring in ice. He's like, huge ice. He's huge. Yeah. And ice day was always a big day. We'd always go and watch because like you never seen that much ice. And they like bring it, like it was mine kind. It was living water that froze and it's melted. And that's just so cool. On the day they fill the mikveh, it wasn't very common. So that was kind of the coolest probably in terms of how they filled it. That was a very nice one also.
Very cool. So. All right, I think we've got some folks who have some questions. There's lots of things in the chat. I think some of them are just comments and not questions, but can we open it up to questions?
Do you want to ask the questions from the chat that you can parse through them before we open up to the floor? Because we definitely would love to talk about questions.
Yes. The first question was, I'm not Orthodox or conservative. Do I belong in this group? Yes.
Everybody. I mean, a group of people who come to mikveh, obviously.
Yes, obviously.
Mikveh for everyone.
Mikveh for everyone.
Yes. It is mikveh for everyone. The conservative movement, I've only ever heard like conversations. No one's ever made decisions on anything, but there's a lot of talk at least about, okay, yes, mikveh is for everyone and even for men. And so like the male partner should go. Rabbi Joel Roth is very adamant that men should. But like, what do you do when you have 2 men? Nobody's menstruating. Two like cisgendered men. No one's menstruating in that. So, but if one of the purposes of mikveh is to, delineate time, this is the time we have sex, this is the time we don't have sex, and there's something very special about the time that you're connecting. But
and also it helps you focus on the other parts of your relationship that are not sex, because sex is so easy to use to like patch things, but communication is a lot harder. So when that's off the table.
I think there is something to having that time reserved for like connecting, but not with sex, connecting in other ways. You don't just like, peace out, spouse. I'll see you in, 7 to 14 days or however you keep it. There is a matter of like how do we stay close and connected without getting sex? But what do you do when neither partner menstruates? What do you do when, the movement hasn't had any answers to that yet, but yes. There's lots of uses for mikveh.
It happens in the Orthodox movement, but people don't talk about it. Well, everything around mikveh in Orthodoxy is just sort of private and personal, and
has been
Maggie, did you want to make a comment?
So maybe, now that it's our turn to ask questions, we could make this not a duet.
Sure.
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Okay, Anne, do it. You've been waving your hand and
Anne, you're on mute.
I was already past menopause when I wanted to go in the mikveh and have that experience. And I had to pretend, well, I didn't pretend. I admitted that I wasn't married and I wasn't doing it in order to have sex. And they didn't care why I was doing it. And they didn't want to let me do it because I wasn't married. And the idea is you go to the mikveh so you can have sex. No, that wasn't why I went. I had my own reasons for wanting to go. And I just, anyway, this woman saw to it that I was allowed to go. She took me into the Chabad mikveh. And the way we do it, we jump up and then we immerse. Because we jump, the gravity will pull us down. So we're totally surrounded. Every cell of the body, every hair on my head was sanctified by the water, because I had already gotten clean. I took a bath and a shower and I washed my hair and everything, cleaned my fingernails. Okay, so I'm totally clean. It's not to get clean, it's to have a spiritual experience. It was a sanctifying experience. It's not about clean. They shouldn't say it's Nita and Tommy are totally different. We're not dirty. We're in need of special sanctification. And anybody can want to be especially sanctified. And so I went always on the night before Yom Kol Nidre. And it felt so, it was spiritual. I felt reborn. I collapsed into a fetal position and then I straightened out again, and I did it 3 times. And then she had me say something special. I forgot what it was because I haven't done it lately. But anyway, I did it every year for years. And it was just so invigorating and vitalizing that I want to encourage everybody not to listen to those people who say it has to do with being tamei or dirty or any of that nonsense. That go for the sanctification of it.
I love that.
I just can't tell you how good it felt.
I love it.
I live in Los Angeles. I've been to the, we're so used to calling it AJU mikveh. But frankly, I think the mikvahs, even in the conservative movement, are still kowtowing to the Orthodox. When you say living water, okay, in case anyone doesn't know, I'm the author of Rashi's Daughters and of Rav Hizda's Daughters and 50 Shades of Talmud. I'm probably as much an expert on sex in the Talmud as anyone. And I certainly am an expert on what Rashi and medieval communities had to say about all this kind of stuff so that I could write my books as accurately as possible. And kol kavod to Rashi, when someone asks him, well, wait, are women allowed to touch Torah scrolls? Are they allowed to into the synagogue? And when they're nida, and he says, we're all tamei hamet. We're all impure by death, and we have been since the temple was destroyed, and there's no more red heifer. So who cares about nida? We're all tamei. We're all, quote, impure. And that has not changed. We still don't have red heifers, and we don't have the temple. So a lot of, I see a lot of this strictness on women from the Orthodox as being the same old-fashioned misogyny that even today some of the women said they were told that women are not allowed to touch a Torah scroll, they're not allowed in a synagogue. Who would know if you're menstruating or not? Only you. And I heard someone say, when they're talking in Israel way back when of living water, they know what living water is. It's not what's in the Dead Sea. So that we don't live that life where there's any Dead Sea around us. And the extent to which the Orthodox have tried to, not my word, but I've heard this from others, out from each other to get stricter and stricter, makes it impossible in many cities where there's zoning laws and health laws to build a quote halachic mikveh. And so most synagogues don't, and most places don't, because it's such a giant hassle. And interestingly, and this is the last thing I want to say on it. Okay, in Maimonides' time, they got rid of the Baal carry, the man with his seminal emission. They said the men were not going to immerse and they weren't washing. And so we just abolished the rule that they were supposed to do anything. But let's face it, the vast majority of Jewish women don't use a mikveh. They haven't. Even the vast majority of Orthodox women don't use a kosher mikveh. Maybe they'll go to a Turkish bath, they'll use their bathtubs, they do all kinds of other stuff. So they feel like they do need to do some kind of immersion. But nobody says, well, no, most women aren't doing it, we should make it easier. Or most women aren't doing it, we should make mikvot easier to get to and cleaner. Because, oh God, the stories I've heard doing this research about some of the Brooklyn mikvot in the Hasidic areas that the yeshiva guys use before Shabbat. Anyway, there's a good reason even today, even though we have lovely, nice ones like the AJU mikveh, that women just don't even want. I think mikveh should be for more reasons than just having sex. My daughter, one of the times I went, my daughter was getting married, and so we're Reformed, but it's fun to go to the mikveh. And so she we set up an appointment. She's a bride. She went, and then they called us. Can you postpone it for like a few hours? We have an emergency. Like, whoa, an emergency mikveh? And we got there, and we saw the other girl coming out, and she was quite young. I mean, she was a teenager, and the mikveh lady said that she needed to go because she had been raped. And I think that is like one of the most wonderful, powerful uses of a mikveh, is someone who needs to heal after, after a miscarriage, after an abortion. There was a woman who had a hysterectomy because she had cancer. And for her to go to the mikveh after that was a very healing experience for her. And I kol kavod to the one in Mayim Hayim in Boston, where they're wide open and encouraging that we need to expand mikveh use for these other non-sexual reasons. And then you get away from all the strictures in Leviticus and Nida entirely. So as somebody in my 8th decade who hasn't seen Nida in, I can't even remember how long, why, I could have other reasons I would want to go for a mikveh. And at least AJU, they do ask, but they don't tell you that you should, I've never heard anyone been told they can't go. I think they maybe just ask for statistical purposes.
Yeah, I'm not sure which messages. You start off by being so negative about mikvahs, and then you end up changing your point of view. I was biting my tongue half the time you were talking, because it's not always a negative experience. It's often a positive experience. And to demean it, you ended up saying how great it is, and then halfway through you were telling us how terrible it is. I don't know where the consistency comes from, and it just isn't fair. I think some of the things you say are absolutely inappropriate for someone who is not a full participant. And to say that all of these things about mikveh are true or not true, or that these are terrible and these are dirty and these are whatever, I think is just inappropriate without having had the experience on a constant basis in a community, in a place where you seem to indicate there are places that are safe and are wonderful and warm even elegant. It should be a universal, and you shouldn't be judging based on some of your negative experiences or what you perceive as negative experiences. And looking around the people who are here, I only see, just judging by appearance, and forgive me for doing that, I don't know everybody well enough to say, but I would say that most of us no longer have to go to the mikveh on a monthly basis. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to go. It doesn't mean that we can't share in the experience. And I can tell you that the mikveh that Alisha is talking about is in fact a community mikveh, and there are very few constraints about who can walk through that door. You just have to come to that person.
The mikveh that's here in that's housed at UOS here in Houston. It is a community mikveh. I personally have taken people for lots and lots of reasons. We keep those appointments. I tend to make them on Sundays during the day, because daytime appointments are for anything that is not nida. Sunday, I know that there's nobody who's going to interrupt, or there's no other appointments that are going to be going on. So I've taken people who are healing from from sexual trauma, things like that. And I don't want to have somebody knocking on the door needing us out at any particular time. So I'm the person who takes those. I'm actually in the Mayim Chaim National Network, the Rising Tide Network, which is sort of, Mayim Chaim is a pluralist mikveh that's based in Boston, and they are trying to sort of make what I call like mini Mayim Chaims across the country. And I am a member of that, and I'm trying to kind of create that mini experience here.
Please let me thank you for the 3 books. I've read them all twice. They're beautiful. And thank you for everything else you said.
Yeah, thank you to Alisha for bringing a modern feminist Orthodox perspective to our conversation. And we always like being able to make our private conversations public. That's always very fun. But it really is, because we like to talk about this stuff. And thank you to everybody from Beth Yeshurun community and from all over the country and all over the world. We're going to both be listening to this right now and listening to a recording. The mikveh and anything, again, like we were saying, anything tied to women, menstruation, sex, even though kind of detangling the knot of mikveh and what it does for people from those things is difficult, because it's so mired in that, just from where it comes from, is important work to do. And I think Alisha and I both come from that perspective of mikveh serves such a great purpose in I'd say for everybody, but definitely, in the Jewish community for people. And so I think that like the advances that we're making, both in the Orthodox sector, it's not a movement, but in the Orthodox community and also in the conservative movement and others, is both in mikveh and its uses for all people needing to have that experience and what mikveh can do for you. And also for how do we relate as Jews to women, men, neither, both, sex, menstruation. These are all normal and natural things. And how do we marry all those things in a really beautiful and Jewishly relevant way? So I thank you all for joining our conversation. Again, if you have any questions, you can email myself, SFORT, @BethYeshurun.org. You can email Alisha at Alisha email address. Don't laugh in the middle of it.
I think that it was actually on the one that Jennifer sent out.
Awesome. So
Yes.
I think Jennifer,
That's going to be the easiest way. I'm happy to help find resources for anybody, or for anybody who's local in Houston. I'm happy to help you make an appointment if you want, or answer anything,
anything mikveh related. No matter where you live, especially if you're here, we can definitely help you head on over and check it out. The community mikveh at UOS is a great, great space. And wherever you are, I'm sure we could find you a mikveh near to where you are to be able to have that experience. And there's also natural water, which we've done
lots
before.
and lots of pluralist mikvahs across the country.
Which are definitely great. So thank you for joining us. Thanks. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Bye.